You're now listening to the sound of sanity. This sound will continue for the duration of the program. Hey everybody, welcome to the Sound of Sanity. This is Nathan Alberson, your humble and obedient host, joined by two of my very good friends. We've got Benjamin J. Solzer there, associate performer.
Hi, I'm here. I'm associate did with this program.
I was about to bump you up to regular performer, but that comment, man.
Forget it. That was so lame.
Well, let's meet one of our executive performers, Jacob Menzel, pastor who's a master of just being sane.
Yeah.
And saying sane-sounding things on a podcast about sanity. Hey, Jake.
Hey.
Guys, today, well, I'm just going to say it.
We're about to get personal.
We're going to get personal. Actually, I don't know how personal. I don't know.
Get
personality tests. We're talking about
get testy.
Yeah, today.
Hey, Nathan, I think you should bump Jake down to associate performer.
Associate performer.
I think you should fire Ben. Wait, I can do that.
Yeah,
Ben,
go for
you're
it.
Fired.
Crud.
All right, turn off the laughing gas, Ben.
Oh.
The people want a podcast. And guys, the podcast that you're going to get today, we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive on a subject that I find to be absolutely fascinating. I don't know about you guys, but today we are talking, and then there's not like sometimes we'll be like, there's a story in the news we're going to talk about, or there's a current event, or something happened, a movie came out. No, none of that this episode. We're just talking about it because we want to talk about it because we find this topic to be interesting, and it's a place where I think we might feel a little tension, a little sanity, insanity, pull, tug of war kind of thing going on. Personality tests. I absolutely love personality tests.
All tests on the internet, I think you love.
Jake, I'm not going to say I love all tests on the internet, but I will say that the piece of garbage that I most resemble is a crumpled soda can. And I really did, true story, find that out the other day. And I felt pretty good about myself. I was like, of all the pieces of garbage I could be, a crumpled soda can is pretty cool.
That's pretty cool, yeah.
Better than like a discarded apple or a banana peel or something,
Right.
I don't know what the other...
Which Marvel superhero are you?
I have been compared to Tony Stark. I'm a Slytherin. I'm Belle. That's the Disney princess I most like. Because I'm feisty and independent or something like that. I'm a sucker for these tests. What's that?
And
I love to read. Yeah, probably. It was like, do you enjoy books? And I said yes. And then it was like, you're Belle.
It didn't matter what you said from that point on.
Yeah, basically. But I am a sucker. I actually had to take myself off of Pinterest. I was on Pinterest for a minute and a half just to share some ideas with my lovely wife, the incandescent Meredith, and I took myself off because Pinterest is a mecca of those kinds of dumb, which... I can't even come up with something that's dumber than what the real one.
Which Miyazaki character? Well, that actually is a real one. Which Miyazaki character are you?
If you were an arachnid, which one would you be? Those kinds of tests, I absolutely love them, and I really
are really close in kind to personality tests, like the Myers-Briggs.
Well, are they, Jake, or should we take Myers-Briggs a little? Let me tell you this. I've done Myers-Briggs before. I've done it for work, or I've done things along those lines for work. And I remember when I did it at one particular job, it was really helpful, not for me, because it felt like it got everything about me wrong. And it ended up giving me what felt, maybe everyone else would be like, this nailed you, Nathan, you just don't understand. But it felt really jank. But what was nice is the categories, I was a supervisor at the time, and they gave me the charts for everyone else. And so I had these little keys that I could use for people where it would be like, this person likes to... They love details. They like if you're going to tell them what to do as a supervisor, you need to lay it out like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. This person hates details. They just want to be told what to do, and then they want to figure out. So having those kinds of things was actually really, really helpful because I'd consult it and I got to know what people's personality types were and what their little, I don't remember, it wasn't Myers-Briggs, what their little numbers were or values or initials were. And it would be this mental placeholder that would help me supervise people, help me explain myself to people. I would consult it and then I would be like, oh, you like details, so I'm going to give you really detailed instructions, which is, I don't like details. I hate details. And I never, if a boss comes to me and wants to give me a detailed list, I'll just feel so oppressed by it. I just want to be told, this is what you need to get done, and then I want to have the freedom to do it my way. But some people aren't like that. And so having that key was really helpful. And then since then, I've taken the Myers-Briggs or some version. Probably a lot of people have done the 16 questions.
16personalities.com or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is that Myers-Briggs, or it's basically
Myers-Briggs.
Yeah.
It may not be like certified or...
They add a couple of things, another category of stuff, I think, but yeah.
I mean,
Myers-Briggs.
But it's free and
in that case,
has nice little animations. And
it's just fun to use. And in that case, I've taken the test a couple times. I've actually gotten the same result, and it was really helpful. It put me at 51% extroverted, which has been an incredibly helpful way to think of myself because I enjoy being the life of the party. I like going on a podcast and being like fun-loving Nathan. I love all that stuff. And then I hate myself afterwards and feel really bad and do not feel energized at all when I get home from something. Like I'll really, hey, everybody, hey! And then I'll just want to curl up and die. Having the extra biblical, the not biblical categories of extrovert and introvert, and then having myself placed on that spectrum by a computer program really helped me understand something about myself and put a finger.
Nathan, I've never told you this before, but you know who else is also a 51% extrovert?
Who's that?
Me!
Are you 51% extroverted?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, let's have a great time and then let's go home and curl up in a ball and die.
Yep.
All right.
Let's go to a break and we'll come back and talk about this in a minute.
Hey, it's the Humanologians. Today we're totally talking about personality tests. Now, a lot of people like to knock personality tests.
Knock. Hey, BJ, knock, knock.
I'm totally going to figure out who it is. Oh, who is it?
Tomato.
Tomato who?
Aren't you glad I didn't say banana?
Shut up, CJ. I totally wanted you to say banana.
Guys, we totally have to take the personality test for this episode, which is about personality tests. Question 1, true or false? You were bothered by mistakes you made a long time ago.
Ha! I don't make mistakes. BJ makes like 4,000 mistakes a day, though. Ha!
Gah! Whatever, CJ. The only reason I ate that feather pillow is because I wanted to be a duck.
And the only reason I married my first smoking hot wife was because she was so smoking hot. No mistake in that. But the reason I married my second smoking hot wife was because she has so much money.
I think that anyone could save a lot of money by the time they're 85 years old.
Shut up, BJ! You're just jealous of my lady skills.
More like old lady skills. Next question. Also true or false? When looking for a movie or show to watch, you can spend ages browsing the catalog.
Booyah! I always know exactly what I want from the catalog. There's that 150-piece puzzle on page 11 with Thomas the Tank Engine. Thomas is on there with Percy. Hey, Mr. Conductor.
BJ, I wasn't talking about a catalog full of children's merchandise.
If you were a man, you'd be looking at, instead of 150-piece puzzles, thousands of pieces puzzles.
What do you think I am, CJ? A nuclear family? A scientist?
More like Thomas the Stank Engine. Ha!
Booyah!
True or false? You lose interest in a discussion when it gets philosophical.
I love philosophy.
You don't even know what philosophy means.
That's because it's not a real word, idiot!
When I talked philosophy with my new smoking hot wife, she had trouble keeping up. Mostly because she was just chasing me with the skillet, telling me just to go live in my man cave.
Speaking of caves and philosophy, do either of you like Plato?
Obviously, I read The Republic in, kindergarten, so I guess you could say I like Plato.
I love Plato. You can make your own Thomas the Tank Engine. I use red Plato and green Plato. Also, did you guys ever read the allegory from Book 7 of The Republic regarding the theory of forms and the nature of true perception?
More like the nature of true BJ's dumb perception.
Ha! How do you think of these witty comebacks?
True or false? You always know exactly what you want.
Anytime I go to McDonald's, I know exactly what I want. A cheesy gordita crunch from Taco Bell.
You, totally like those things, too much, BJ.
That's totally not true, AJ. There are lots of reasons to want to name my firstborn child Gordita.
But what about the middle name, huh?
Crunch isn't also a middle name.
True or false? You often rethink your choices and wonder what you could have done differently.
BJ makes the dumbest choices, like that time he cut off his own hand. Ha!
Shut up, CJ. I was trying to decapitate a puppet.
Moving right along, true or false, you have a hard time understanding other people's feelings.
I totally understand all the other people's feelings all the time. For example, when my smoking hot wife, her lips turn upside down, the water comes out of her eyes, she makes boo-hoo sounds, and it means she wants nachos or something. Water comes out of BJ's eyes when he watches Beauty and the Beast.
Shut up, CJ. The ending gets me every time.
I know, right? It's hard to think that Gaston's sacrifice was in vain.
And speaking of vain, I thought Gaston was really vain, and also really scary. I was glad when he got his comeuppance. The Beast was more manly.
When he became a man, he became this, like, really girly-looking man, like he totally looked like a girl.
Oh, I also like when Cogsworth and Lumiere were reconciled, putting aside their differences. And when the stool turned into a puppy. Ha 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 ha. Be our guest, put our service to the test.
You know, it's a good thing that BJ's hand was reattached, rendering the entire hand incident moot as it regards past or future episodes of Humanologians.
Tale as old as time, Beauty and the Beast.
What do you guys? I mean, Jake, has it been helpful? Do you like those?
I think there were some things that were helpful. Just sort of yeah, that's right. That is one of my weaknesses. Or the way that this personality test articulates a weakness that I've recognized or that other people have recognized in me. That's helpful, and that reinforces either self-criticisms or criticisms from other people, ways I need to grow. So that's been helpful, and also with working with other people from time to time. I don't know. I feel like...
Well, what I feel like these kinds of things do for me is they simply provide language. And I think a lot of psychology and psychiatry and these kinds of fields, like, for example, the categories of extroversion and introversion, these are not biblical categories. They do capture a way that people are and a way that we feel, and they give us some language for it. And I think at their best, that's what people like Freud and Jung, who both introduced some whack-a-doodle terrible ideas and very unscientific ideas to the world. The one thing that really is the great legacy of those men is they just gave us some words like subconscious. We all know that there's things going on in our brains that we don't really think about. And so to have a word to talk about that is kind of handy, They can be handy little placeholders. So it's like, would I have figured out how to interact with the employees at work without a personality test? Sure. Was it nice to have some handy dandy mental pegs to hang those ideas on?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, when it comes to understanding other people, we always start with our first point of reference, which is ourself, right? And so much of teaching people to love one another is teaching them to understand the ways that people are different from them. That's what's helpful about dumb books like the love languages thing, right?
Right.
There's not a lot to that except the simple idea that, hey, the way that you feel love and affection, what makes you feel loved is not necessarily what makes somebody else feel loved. Step outside of yourself.
Which when you say that out loud, it's like, that's not very groundbreaking. And yet entire relationships fall apart, divorces happen, horror, pain, misery comes into the world because people don't just...
They can't step outside themselves and recognize...
Wait a second. She doesn't feel loved when I do this thing that would make me feel loved. And I don't feel loved when,
Yeah. Oh, and she's doing something that, for me, that makes her feel loved, but doesn't do it for me, but she's trying, but I don't there's a communication break.
Well, it sounds like
right?
It's one of the same reasons we read fiction, is to understand other people better and not be just caught inside ourselves and our own basic way of perceiving the world and realize, wait a minute, people might have had this experience. I've never had that experience, and I never thought about it before, but I'm sure glad I read War and Peace.
Right, and it gives you categories again, right? Yeah. Like people that love fiction, aka nerds.
Don't call me a nerd.
Not you, Ben.
Oh.
Me and Jake, though.
Good.
We
have a fiction podcast.
Yeah. I'm also a nerd. That's true.
A large part of the reason that I think we like it, at least if you're my kind of nerd, is... You like to have categories. Oh, that's a Obi-Wan Kenobi. I mean, that's a silly example. But, are you behaving like...
Qui-Gon or Obi-Wan?
You were right about one thing, Master. The negotiations were short.
Qui-Gon or Obi-Wan, yeah, well, I've had those conversations. It sounds silly, right? But I've actually figured out things about myself or about other people by talking to, me and Jake will talk about something. And it's not that we're nerding out about Star Wars, but just having those little handy, simple reference points. Oh, you're being a Darcy and she's being an Elizabeth, or
worse, Lydia and Wickham.
Wickham. Yeah. I mean, understanding Wickham as a category of men is very handy for young ladies. They need to watch out for Wickhams. And saying watch out for Wickhams is handy shorthand that enables me not to have to say watch out for callow young men that want to seduce you and just have a lot of surface appeal and blah, 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 blah. If you've read the book, all I have to do is say watch out for Wickhams. Now,
true.
If we're going to talk about personality tests, we really should probably learn a little something about personality tests, right, Brian?
Yeah.
I'm glad you agree. So let's go into a segment called Learning More About Personality Tests.
Woo!
Welcome to Learning More About Personality Tests. I'm your host, Nathan Alverson. We've got Ben Solzer over there. We've got Jacob Menzel.
Hey, it's me.
Right there. It's him.
It's definitely him.
Guys, personality tests sure are weird, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, you take Herman Rorschach. He was a Swiss...
From the comic book series? Or
That guy's name was not Herman, I don't think.
No, something else.
It should be.
It should have been, yeah.
Yeah.
No, his name was Rorschach, and he liked to kill people and stuff. That was dark. Don't read that comic, people. Don't watch the movie. Don't watch the new HBO show. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't figure it out. Herman Rorschach, he was a Swiss psychiatrist. Wow. Herman Rorschach.
We're coming again.
Herman Rorschach, he was just to give you an example of the kinds of things that people have done. He's a Swiss psychiatrist who you probably know invented the Rorschach ink blot test thing. But basically what he did is he just took a parlor game and turned it into an ink blot test, just like what do you see in the ink blot? And the results of that thing were actually taken very seriously in courtrooms and mental hospitals for decades.
Whoa. And then there's that dude who developed the thematic apperception test, which all of our listeners have taken, I hope. If you haven't, please take it. If you could take it today and submit your results to us, that would be very helpful to us to understand you, because we don't understand you guys, and we don't understand ourselves.
Right.
Until we take the thematic apperception test, which this one professor developed with the help of his lover. We know it's a good test because...
it's called the thematic.
Yeah. How could you not think it's a good test?
There's also the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, developed by Stark Hathaway. It's another great comic book name. That is a cool comic book. Stark Hathaway.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a Midwestern psychologist, obviously, Minnesota. And he just had a bunch of questions about your religious beliefs, your sex life, your bathroom habits, and somehow that was going to, divine who you are.
In his Minnesota Multiphysics Personality Inventory, the MMPI?
Indeed.
That's crazy. Well, and then, of course, there's Isabel Myers, the Pennsylvania housewife who, well, we'll learn a lot more about her in a minute. But let's talk about the history of personality tests. Where do personality tests come from, Ben?
I think what you want to hear is that they started evolving about 100 years ago during World War I, when people wanted to understand personality problems, mental health problems. At least that's what Jim Butcher says. Jim Butcher is an emeritus psychologist at the University of Minnesota, and that's what he gives as a history.
This the Scientific American, what Mr. Butcher says, or Professor Butcher, whatever he is, he says that Dr. Butcher, maybe?
Dr. Butcher.
Dr. Butcher is a really cool name.
Yeah.
Dr. Butcher. That's
Paging Dr. Butcher.
Paging Dr. Butcher.
The surgeon
to surgery.
Shortly, Dr. Butcher.
Yes.
Another patient is here for you.
These guys are really all comic book characters.
Yeah. Well, I want to put them together. Stark Hathaway, billionaire playboy by day, Dr. Butcher by night.
Wow.
But he adds that the U.S. military basically developed a lot of this stuff because they wanted to weed out soldiers who weren't fit. Specifically when the Air Force came in, they wanted to make sure that people weren't crazy and were going to be able to fly these giant, deadly pieces of machinery. And so they began to develop tests and questionnaires to try and weed out people that would not be fit to fly an airplane.
Yeah, according to Dr. Butcher, over the course of the first half of the 20th century, people really began coming up with all kinds of different personality scales, not just for mental health diagnoses, but just to try to figure out what personality is like and to weed through, what's subjective about this, what's subjective about these tests, and how do we come up with objective measurable scales for figuring out who people are and predicting how they'll behave in situations or what they'll do.
Right. And then the problem, as you'll note, if you read anything about this, is that it's just really subjective. Like, why would there be 16 personality? You know, Myers-Briggs says there's 16. Why? Enneagram says there's 9. Why? Where you know, and people will have, you know, Enneagram. We're going to talk about that. That comes from some ancient esoteric texts. But they will make these delineations that really feel pretty subjective, maybe a little bit.
Subjective, self-confirming.
So someone tells you you're an introvert, you decide you're an introvert, you may feel...
And then you begin to behave like an introvert and use your self-diagnosis of introversion to justify antisocial behavior.
Yeah.
I feel like we're getting ahead of ourselves here, you guys. I mean, yeah.
Well, Ben...
Sounds like we're making judgments about personality tests.
We do. One thing that we do not do on Sound of Sanity is ever make any judgments. So...
You know, I hope not.
And plus, I'm a perceptive individual, not one of those judging. I intuit, I perceive...
Hey,
I do not judge.
You know, that's good because as I'm learning on this Enneagram website, Life in the Trinity, the great Jesuit, I'm quoting here from a workshop précis, the great Jesuit teacher Anthony de Mello challenges us to wake up. He adds, "It is non-judgmental awareness alone that heals and changes and makes one grow. Suzanne Stabile is an Enneagram master." She states, "I would say non-judgmental awareness is the gift of the Enneagram." End quote. I just wanted to share that. I just felt I'm glad that you're practicing non-judgmental awareness.
Yeah.
Well,
I hope we all are. I hope our listeners are.
That's really we should change the show from the Sound of Sanity to the Sound of Non-Judgmental Awareness. It's more catchy.
It really is. And
it does a better job of capturing what we're all about.
We're all about.
Right.
Really, the whole
That's right.
Warhorn family of shows is about non-judgmental awareness. I think that's what our critics and our fans
we
would
owe
agree.
it to the Jesuits.
we do owe it to the Jesuits. And you know what else the Jesuits would probably like is some more facts about personality
I bet
tests.
they would.
How'd you like that transition?
All right, that was very good.
Bringing it back. In the U.S. alone, there are about 2,500 personality tests on the market. Now, what is one of the most popular of those that our listeners probably will have heard of, boys?
Probably the most popular one still is Myers-Briggs, or MBTI.
Myers-Briggs Type Indicator.
Yeah, it's used by 89 of the Fortune 100 companies. It's been translated into 24 languages. It's been adopted by governments and military agencies around the world, universities. Everybody uses Myers-Briggs to some degree to figure out how to care for their employees, their students.
Have either of you guys had to actually take an official Myers-Briggs for a workplace type situation?
I have not had to take one for an official workplace. I have had to take personality tests.
Yes, I've had to take something pretty similar to Myers-Briggs, but I don't think it was Myers-Briggs in and of itself.
I don't remember ever having to take one for employment. Taking them for fun.
Well, Ben, how many people do you suppose take Myers-Briggs every year?
Well, Nathan, I'm going to guess it is about 2 million people.
And how many monthly queries from Myers-Briggs do you suppose there are on Google?
Oh, 135,000 probably.
And how many just for personality tests while we're at it?
Probably 301,000.
You'd be correct.
Man,
You're such a good guesser.
Yeah.
I'm good at this.
You don't even need this segment learning about personality tests. You already have random stats and figures. Guys, let's talk a little bit more about Myers-Briggs, because I think most of our listeners are probably familiar with it. It's like the big one. It's the, I don't know what
it's
an analogy
the
is.
behemoth.
It's the behemoth.
It's sort of the gold standard in terms of what people rely on in terms of personality tests. The Enneagram is super popular now, super trendy.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But the Myers-Briggs has been the backbone of personality tests for a long time.
And spoiler alert, I think it's pretty helpful. But we'll get to that.
Nathan, if the Myers-Briggs personality test had a personality type, what would it be? ENFTJ?
Well, it's definitely extroverted. Look at how much it's getting around.
All right, yeah. It's definitely extroverted.
Let's see here. What's the next thing? It's
sensing or intuitive?
It's intuitive.
Yeah, it's
intuitive.
So EIN.
EN.
So I got EN.
Yeah.
And then what else is there?
It's feeling or thinking.
It thinks, baby.
It thinks?
Yeah.
Okay. ENT.
ENT.
And then J, it makes judgments.
It makes judgments.
Judging instead of perceiving.
So what did I say? ENFTJ? That doesn't even make sense, people. Who do I think I am? I don't even know how a Myers-Briggs personality test is supposed to come out in letters. But I was
ENFTJ?
close. I think I said ENFTJ, so I left myself wiggle room, but I still was right because it's ENTJ.
Right.
So I got it right. First try.
There you go. Well, we've talked a lot about Carl Jung here on the program. You can listen to our episodes on the hero's journey.
Jordan
Peterson. Jordan Peterson, actually, I think we did a whole Monsters in the Attic where we talked a lot about the history of Carl Jung. Interesting fella. A lot of weird things about him that are worth knowing.
Yeah.
But this is just one more place where Jung's influence is pervasive.
You
in
could
our
make an
culture
argument.
today.
This guy's
Yeah.
like the intellectual father of the 20th century and
He
the 21st
is one of the most
century.
influential intellectuals of the 20th century. There's no question about it. And
Right.
it's weird to realize that when so many people haven't heard his name, or
Everybody
they've
knows-
heard his name, but they don't know a thing about him.
Everybody knows Freud. I would say Freud's given us some terminology, but in terms of just infecting the sort of bedrock of the way we think.
Freud's also given us Carl Jung,
Yeah, well, you make a fair point, Jake.
but it really was Jung. It is the ways that Jung built on Freud that have really shaped modern psychology, psychiatry, and I mean, everything from storytelling, Hollywood, everything.
And Jung actually developed the idea of, I believe, 8 opposing pairs of character traits, which are present in all of us. So extrovert, introvert, things like that. And the Myers-Briggs came about because of some lady named Catherine Briggs.
Yeah, Catherine Briggs was a wealthy housewife from Washington, D.C.
Her daughter Isabel one day brought home this guy named Clarence Myers. She thought this was a great guy, but also he's kind of weird. She wanted to figure him out.
We've all been here, right? Like, we know somebody, they seem really nice, but who is this person? You don't know how to
Can't
read
put your
them.
finger on
They don't
them,
fit into
yeah.
categories that you already kind of understand.
And so she started reading about personality types and things like that. She got into Jung's psychological types, became fascinated with them. She began referring to Jung's psychological types as her Bible. And her daughter Isabel and Clarence, they got infected by this. They became avid type watchers. And although Jung only identified 8 personality types, Isabel eventually doubled that number into 16 and, figured out a way to divide it up and to really sort of further develop and build on Jung's idea of his personality types.
So just for those of you who are tracking, this system, which is used by governments, which is used by businesses, which is used by Fortune 500, which is used by millions of people every year, some lady came up with it, right? She took Jung's types. She came up with some more types just from people watching. Her daughter and her just came up with it and decided it was a thing and decided that those were the types. Now, again, I've already said, spoiler alert, I like Myers-Briggs. I think they did a good job, but it's important to emphasize they weren't building on any higher authority than just
Their own personal observations.
their own personal observations.
What they liked, what interested them.
What they liked, what interested, and what they observed about, it'd be like if you went to the mall and just watched people and, well, there's this kind of person that goes to the mall. There's this kind of person that goes to the mall. There's this kind of person that goes to a mall. So that's Myers-Briggs. 16 personality types, vaguely based on Jung, but they actually doubled it. They came up with 8 that Jung never came up with. And Jung, if you listen to our Monsters in the Attic, like, he also, at a certain point, he thought that a demon was talking to him. He wasn't exactly...
He's a pretty messed up guy.
He wasn't exactly Mr. Scientific research dude. Like,
No.
he just came up with these with his personality types. Jung was really something of a mystic, something of a Gnostic, something of a prophet. I think in another era, I think people would actually think of him more as a sage or as a wise man or as a
medicine man,
witch
doctor,
as a Rasputin kind of a guy.
Yeah.
Even he has this kind of vaguely scientific sheen to him because we think of him as a psychiatrist and as a researcher, but really he was just a mystic.
And part of what he felt that he needed to recover for modern society was a more mystical approach to life, right? Like, what he didn't like about Freud was classifying everything into really neat scientific categories.
Right.
Making everything, biological, making everything chemical. What he thought we lost, and one of the things that we talked about in that Jordan Peterson episode, one of the things that he thought we lost was the idea of us all needing a more mystical narrative truth to help us understand our place in the world. And that is what all of modern Hollywood is built off of.
Right. Well, and I'm forgetting what but it was what you're talking about. It wasn't necessarily always some deep metaphysical discussion between the two men. There's an anecdote about, I forget what the actual thing was, but Jung says, I can make that lighter explode with my mind, and Freud says, no, you can't. And then the lighter explodes or falls, the thing falls off the desk or something. There's a famous story. So Jung really was embracing a kind of spiritualism that Freud was opposed to. This was a real concrete discussion between these two men. And so you just have to keep that in mind. It's not that, again, we're going to come back and talk about this more, but it's not that Myers-Briggs can't be helpful. I think it actually happens to be quite helpful, but it's rooted in a lot of weird stuff, a lot of subjective stuff, and not in a lot of real hardcore scientific or even based on old philosophies, old, nobody was going through the Bible. Nobody was going through Plato even to synthesize these things. It's just stuff that people came up with.
Yeah, it's like a strain of paganism that everyone naturally latches onto and uses authoritatively because everyone is worshiping something.
Well, and when something has a fancy title, you just kind of accept, well, it must be rooted in something,
It's like a guy in a white coat.
What draws people to any religion? One of the main draws to any religion is the promise that this will help you understand yourself and your place in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Jung was out to do. He was out to construct essentially a religion, a modern religion that was more scientific, but was still a modern way of figuring out who we are and our place in the world.
Yeah, well, and that's a good transition into one of the things we really want to talk about in this episode, which is something that's very popular among evangelicals and that gives me a lot more pause. I'm assuming you guys a lot more pause even than Myers-Briggs or some of these other personality tests, which is the Enneagram. Now, what is the Enneagram, Ben?
Well, Nathan, the Enneagram is another personality typing tool. There are 9 types that you can be instead of 16 in the Myers-Briggs. Here's a quote from the Enneagram Institute to help you understand what it's supposed to do for you. Quote, "The Enneagram of personality types is a modern synthesis of a number of ancient wisdom traditions. At its core, the Enneagram helps us to see ourselves at a deeper, more objective level, and can be of invaluable assistance on our path to self-knowledge. The Enneagram Institute is currently engaged in presenting and sponsoring workshops and courses devoted to the many unique aspects of the Enneagram and their relationships to human nature." End quote. So it's supposed to get inside you and show you yourself objectively. So it sounds great.
If people have seen this, though, I think some Christians will be given pause simply by observing what this is because it looks like a satanic symbol.
That's right.
Actually, it looks like a pentagram. It's a circle with a triangle inside it and then a square inside it. Kind of looks like a pentagram, and it makes these 9 points. Each point is a number. Each number is a personality type. So if you're into Enneagram, then, if you Myers-Briggs, you might say, I'm an EFTJ, whatever. Enneagram, you're going to say, I'm a 9, I'm an 8. You're acting like a 7.
So it also feels like it's got numerology.
Yeah, exactly. And important to note, Enneagram, when it first hit the market, was marketed more that way. It used to show up in the New Age section of bookstores, where they have all the dumb
That was
occultic.
part of the appeal, was designing it or selling it in a way that looks occultic. Plays on numerology, plays on astrology, plays on pagan symbolism, satanic symbolism, occult symbolism.
Well, and it's got some of that mystique. Even the Christians that use it would admit, I think, that it's maybe rooted in some of those things. So, Jake, tell us a little bit about the history of the Enneagram.
So the person who originally put the system together was Oscar Icazo. I'm not sure how to say his name. Again, per the Enneagram Institute, Icazo was born in Bolivia. He was raised there and in Peru. And as a young man, he moved to Buenos Aires, Argentina, to learn from a school of inner work of some sort. After that, he did some journeying, backpacking in Asia, gathering knowledge. He's got one of these, mystical stories of all of the far-off places, that far-off, schools, sort of like Doctor Strange. He's been all over. He's learned from all the mystics. He's going to synthesize it all for us into this systematic approach called the Enneagram. And that's the myth or the story of Icazo and the birth of the Enneagram that's told.
Right. He basically wandered in the desert and came back with secret knowledge, which is something that sages have been doing since the beginning of time.
Millennia. Yeah, and even if that's not something that he actually did, the marketers know that that story adds to the mythos of it all and sells it. So
Right. Most Enneagram teachers assert that it's much more ancient than Icazo. We could talk a little bit about where it first made its appearance. I think the term Enneagram comes from this guy. I have no idea how to pronounce his name, but a Georges I. Gurdjieff, who was alive in the late 1800s. And
yeah, he was a Russian millionaire, and he had something called the Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man in Moscow in 1922. So he got this symbol from his travels through Central Asia, and he said that Sufis taught him about the numerology and mystical uses like divination, And then Ikazo is the one who tied personality types to the symbol of the Enneagram, which already had these other mystical uses. And then people will claim other ancient origins, like we said. So is it from Sufism? I mean, I guess we don't really know.
People will say the ancient wisdom of the Chaldeans. They'll say the Pythagoreans. They'll connect it to...
They'll connect it. I think I read someone connecting it to the Desert Fathers. I mean,
Yes,
if you go
I've read that
online,
too.
you will find all these histories. You will find more critical histories from, interestingly enough, the Catholics, who have been critical of this as a New Age practice for some time. Of course, you'll find many proponents, Christian and otherwise, claiming various ancient origins.
Right. This is another in our series of things that evangelicals are always the thing that the world's already bored with. They're getting excited about. The Catholics were already on the case, I think, decades ago. They were against this as a kind of New Age practice. But the important point to make about what Ben's saying is that the Enneagram proponents will make it sound like this comes through some kind of ancient esoteric wisdom. They have no evidence for that. And the thing that they say, is why would we? It's ancient and esoteric, like it was passed on verbally from person to person, which is awfully convenient because it means that there's no documentation.
Right.
I mean, it's a little bit like
Catholic claims for their tradition about their own doctrines.
Exactly. What I was going to say is Mormons, Joseph Smith just got this information. He was the one guy.
He looked into a hat.
Right. He looked into a hat. The angel Gabroni told him some stuff.
Moroni.
The
angel Moroni.
The angel Jabroni.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Hey, mine makes about as much sense as his does.
Wow.
I mean, what you'll see, this goes without saying perhaps, but what you'll see across many false teachers is that they just say, I got some wisdom thing about Christianity. One of the proofs of it, one of the evidences of it, certainly not the only one, is just simply that there's a lot of documentation. The Bible is, lest we forget, a collection of many books written by many different people talking about the same stuff, which is... people will say, well, how can you believe the Bible? It's just a book that No, it's not just a book. It's 66 books written by wildly different men or compiled much later, which is a lot different than what you have with almost any other major religion, and certainly with these little esoteric, occultic branches of quote-unquote knowledge. The Enneagram, it's a big fad right now among evangelicals, which is one of the reasons we're talking about it.
And of course it would be. I mean, if you think about it, just this simply, what's the largest group of vaguely religious people who really want some degree of self-understanding but don't have it and don't have anybody providing it to them?
Takes telling it like it is.
Who don't have, who all the people that are supposed to be helping them have some self-understanding are falling down on the job as a principal. It's evangelical Christians. And so this is completely primed to be a little mystical, primed to be spiritual, desirous of some degree of self-understanding, not getting it from their pastors or shepherds. And so they're looking around and, here's the Enneagram.
Basically, when I was talking about the history of the Enneagram earlier, I was basically quoting from an article from Catholic Culture, which we'll link in the show notes. And the Catholics have done really good work.
They have.
In examining this stuff. I don't know if you, Nathan, had something else to read from them, but they had this whole report they put out in 2003, I think. We'll link that in the show notes too.
Yes, sir.
And it said, the Enneagram, the 9-type tool for character analysis, which when used as a means of spiritual growth, introduces an ambiguity in the doctrine and the life of the Christian faith. Now that may sound mild, but that's actually not a very mild thing to say. An ambiguity in the life and doctrine is actually, that's the kind of thing that you want to iron out.
Right.
You want to stamp it out.
Ambiguities in life and doctrine are bad.
Yeah. They are bad.
You don't want ambiguities in life and doctrine.
Right.
Doctrine and practice, that's basically everything.
That's the ball game.
Right.
That's the whole ball game. Yeah, that's the whole ball game.
Yeah.
Life is full of ambiguities that we have to approach, which is why we want our doctrine to be solid, so that we have a way to approach the ambiguities of our day-to-day existence.
Yeah, and there are some ambiguities that we have to live with.
Oh, sure.
But what we don't want to do is start introducing ambiguities.
Yeah.
Where they don't need to be none.
We don't need any extra ambiguities.
Oh, man.
Well, we found a pretty scary / hilarious website called Life in the Trinity.
I already quoted from it earlier.
Right. This is a large-scale Christian ministry, and if you look at the website, Life in the Trinity Ministry, they bill themselves as a non-profit Christian ministry located in Dallas, Texas. Quote, this inclusive ministry uses Christian principles to encourage civility, to foster personal growth, and to work towards the creation of community among all peoples. Sounds okay, I guess. Maybe a little cheesy in the language, but nothing that really jumps out at you as being weird or Enneagram based.
Until you get a little deeper, right?
Yeah.
So you start to read about their speakers, and Ben, you already told us a little bit about Enneagram Master Susan Stabile.
Yeah. I was quoting her about her workshop, and she wrote something about the Jesuits, and then she confirmed that what they said was great. And I don't know if the Jesuits would actually agree, although I think from what I've read of them, the Jesuits would tend to be in line with the kind of language the Enneagram uses. That's why Susan Stabile likes it.
Yeah.
So there's Susan Stabile, who the website claims is a highly sought-after speaker and teacher, known for her engaging laugh,
That's good.
personal vulnerability, and creative approach to Enneagram instruction. There's Joey Shui, who has been a student of the Enneagram for more than 20 years as an Enneagram mentor. She completed an intensive 3-year apprenticeship with Suzanne in 2006 and is taught in tandem with the Enneagram Master for over a decade.
I like that. I just like that turn of phrase. And taught in tandem with the Enneagram Master.
And then there's Billy, who has a knowledge of the power of the Enneagram as a spiritual tool, an engaging presentation style, and a passion for helping others. There's Hunter, who was introduced to the ancient spiritual wisdom tool, the Enneagram, years ago when he met Master Enneagram teacher Susan Stabile.
If you look at the website, though, it's called Life in the Trinity Ministry. I read their description, which doesn't mention the Enneagram. It's got a picture of a boring old church building.
Yeah.
And it just looks like kind of a church website or a church ministry website. You'd be forgiven. I mean, I don't know that you'd really be forgiven, but I could see a simple Christian going on this website, not looking very hard, and just assuming this was a legitimate ministry. And it's not. It's just an Enneagram Institute.
Well, here, let me just. There's all these like audio, video packages you can buy, talks that are given. So here are some things that, Suzanne Stabile has written books like An Enneagram Journey to Healthy Relationships. That's the subtitle of one book, but
She seems like the brains behind this outfit.
she does. But she has something for like every number type, like how to develop your repressed center thinking, how to develop your repressed center doing, how to develop your repressed center feeling, the Enneagram and grieving, Enneagram and anger or rage, centering prayer, the fruits of the Spirit, simplicity and Sabbath, gut triad. It's all stuff, though, processed through the lens of the Enneagram.
Right.
We're not just talking about Bible teaching.
No, we're processing Bible teaching through the lens of the Enneagram.
That's what's happening.
Right. So what's the foundational authority, the foundational text by which we read and understand ourselves? Well, that's the Enneagram. And then we can interpret Scripture and apply Scripture through the lens of the Enneagram. The Enneagram's the foundational text for self-understanding.
Which is, interestingly, if you click on any of their links, if you look at any of their materials, that's really obvious, and yet they don't choose to just bill themselves that way, which I find fascinating. Like if they said, we are the Enneagram Spiritual Bible Institute, that'd be one thing, but instead they call themselves Life in the Trinity Ministries. And I read their little description at the top. It doesn't say anything about the Enneagram. But then it's like, they're not really hiding it. They're selling books called An Enneagram Journey to This, or The Fruit of the Spirit and Enneagram. But it is a fascinating little website.
It is.
We'll be back.
Good news, Lance. I'm a practical and fact-minded individual whose reliability cannot be doubted.
Chip, don't you have some work to be doing
That's
right now?
right, Lance. I don't make many assumptions, preferring instead to analyze my surroundings, check my facts, and arrive at practical courses of action.
Sorry, what's that again?
Say, Lance, you're not a squirrel, are you? I see some peanuts on your desk there, so you could forgive me for wondering. As I was saying, I don't make assumptions, preferring instead to analyze.
Where's all this coming from, Chip?
It's in my personality test, Lance.
Your what, Chip?
Mylar-Briggs, and was it Stratton?
Briggs and Stratton was a lawnmower, Chip.
Is that so? Well, I'm a logistician myself, but I'm sure I can learn to get along with the lawnmower.
Chip, you're a logistician?
That's my personality type, Lance, per my test.
Now, Chip, why on earth did you take a personality test in the first
Ain't
place?
it obvious, Lance? I've been taking all kinds of internet tests. Would it surprise you to know that the Harry Potter character I'm most like is error, page not loaded?
All right, Chip, you took a personality test. Just go ahead and tell me all the things you learned.
Well, as I said, Lance, I'm a logistician.
Chip, if you're a logistician, I'm a monkey's uncle.
A monkey's uncle? Sorry, Lance, I don't follow your logist.
That's not how you say that, Chip.
Sorry, Lance, I doesn't follow your logist.
Right, Chip, I got a lot of work to be doing. Just go ahead and tell me about the test. And
Well, according to this personality test, I am neither spontaneous, nor talkative, nor playful.
you're not spontaneous?
Sure wish I had some birthday cake right now, Lance. You got any?
No. Or talkative either, huh?
That's right, Lance. Not talkative. Say, Lance, that word talkative reminds me of every other word in the English dictionary that starts with a T. You want me to listen for you?
Well,
Well, you start tab. Followed, of course, by table. Then you got text. Next would be Tyrannosaurus. Now, like many of the other words I mentioned, this one reminds me of a story.
Chip, you've been standing there talking to yourself for like the last 3 hours. You want to just get back to the personality test?
Hi, how the time flies. And speaking of flies, and that's step 5 of building a rutabaga cannon, Lance.
All right, Chip, that's enough about that.
What about step 36? What about step 37? And so on. A lot of steps to go, Lance.
Chip, why don't we just get back to the personality test? That's the thing you really want to tell me about, right? It's something about you not being playful.
Not playful at all, Lance. Oh, how do I explain it? Here, you take this sock puppet, and I'll take this sock puppet, and we'll act her all out so you understand.
Yeah, maybe some other time. Chip got a lot of work to do, but what else did you want to tell me about what you learned in the test?
I'm a very methodical person whose loyalty is not given away lightly.
By the way, Chip, someone wants you to sign this here form. It says company owns all your organs, reserves the right to preserve you in formaldehyde for licensing purposes in the case of your untimely death, in return for which you get this year's Snickers bar.
Oh, thanks, Lance. Where do I sign? As I was saying, per these Myers-Briggs fellows, I'm very slow to make friends.
Right, yeah. Did you happen to meet the new accountant, David, by the way?
I met him in the elevator coming up.
Mhm.
Sad about his wife dying, but I'm bringing a roast to his house on Thursday, which is what she always made him on their anniversary.
I'm shocked.
Nice about his daughter being pregnant, though. Whoops, I wasn't supposed to mention that.
Now, Chip, if I may be so bold, I'm not quite sure your personality test captured all your nuances. They just don't work that well. They don't work well for me neither.
Well, Lance, now that you mention it, I took the test for you, too. But I must have clicked a wrong button or something, because it said you were easily irritated with your peers or subordinates and obsequious to a fault with your superiors.
Oh, Chip, do shut up.
Lance, did you get Chip to sign away his organs?
Sure, Stone, of course. Might as well call me Johann Bach the way I've been collecting organs today.
It said you were easily demoralized when crossed, Lance.
Johann Bach, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, Lance.
Oh, well, sorry, Stone. I won't try to be funny no more.
But that you rallied quickly thereafter.
But I guess you can't win them all, right, Stone?
Shut up, Lance.
Yeah, this test didn't have much on you, did it, Lance?
Okay, Chip, can we just be done with the personality tests, okay? They're just dumb, that's all.
Of course we can, Lance. It also said you was easily flustered.
Well, dang it all, Chip. No, well, that's
and you can become highly volatile when you feel put upon.
Just shut up, Chip. Would you shut up? You've been chewing my ear off for the last, I don't know, however many hours.
And then when you're really at the breaking point, it said you just walk away.
Ugh!
Lance? Lance? I guess he was annoyed that his personality test was so off base. A fact that I grasped using my logistical abilities. Speaking of logist, I think it's time for me to do the next logistical thing I would do, if I were going to do it, which I am. Go fishing with dermatologist.
When I let you make a wish, I didn't know I'd have to fish.
I don't know. What do you guys want to say about the Enneagram in particular, and then about personality tests in general?
I don't want to say a lot about Enneagram because I've never taken it. I don't know anything about it, really, apart from the research that we've done. I don't know how helpful it is. Maybe it's helpful, like any other personality test, in describing aspects of someone's personality. Mm-hmm. Personality tests can be helpful that way. They can tell you a little bit about who you are, a little bit about how other people are or how they approach life, as a separate tool for gaining some insight into yourself or into other people. That's fine. There's not a big problem with it. Where there's a problem is when it begins to become a controlling principle in your life, when it begins to be the lens through which you interpret yourself and everyone else around you, when it begins to become a means of justifying your behavior, locking you into, or other people into, boxes that really just aren't biblical, a way of excusing a lack of sanctification or a false means of approaching sanctification, growth in godliness. That's when things like this can become a real problem. So if it's going to be like your mystical religion, that's idolatry and you need to repent of it. If it's going to be your controlling principle of the way that you interpret yourself, that is making it your own mystical religion, and it's something you need to repent of. If it's a helpful way of getting at some truths and explaining some truths about yourself or other people that help you then you can reframe that in biblical terms, then great, I see no problem with that. But the lines between the two can be really blurred.
And I think the reason we're maybe more uncomfortable with the Enneagram is because it seems to intentionally blur those lines more. At the very least, you could say its iconography is more religious, more mystical.
Well, I don't know that they're actually that much more dangerous than each other. I think what makes us more uncomfortable with the Enneagram is that the Enneagram is deliberately spiritual in its terminology, and Myers-Briggs cloaks its spirituality in scientific terminology that makes it feel more objective.
Right.
But you have just as much ability to be to use Myers-Briggs as an interpretive tool, a foundational way of thinking about life and people and yourself, as you do with the Enneagram. Doing that is wrong. It's an unbiblical way of understanding yourself, and it's an unbiblical way of understanding on the most fundamental levels how people work. Right. It doesn't factor sin into the equation.
Right.
It doesn't factor in the ways that we grow and the ways that we change, and the fact that we are much more than types.
Right.
We're fluid. We're not the same today as we were yesterday.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Saying that I'm an INFP, it may and does in fact say some things about how I approach life and what I'm good at, what my strengths are and what my weaknesses are, and the ways that I need to grow. And that can be helpful and useful, but or saying that I'm a whatever number I actually am.
Right.
Maybe that can be useful too. But letting these things be the filter through which we view the world is dangerous.
Right. And we all know that there are many people who think of themselves, for example, just to take a very simple example, as introverts. And that gives them an excuse not to go to Sunday school. That gives them an excuse not to help out on Wednesday nights with church programs. That gives them an excuse
to just be selfish and be like, hey, you know what?
Not to love their neighbor, not to do the basic things that God calls us to do. They need to think about that biblically. They need to think about they fear man and don't fear God. They need to think about all kinds of things. Now, is it helpful to know, I feel kind of drained after I'm with people and I'm not as naturally good with people as someone who's good with people? Yeah, really helpful thing to acknowledge about yourself. But to let that be the crutch that you live your life on is bad.
Yeah, I mean, one helpful thing about the concept of introversion and extroversion is simply being able to say to yourself, hey, you know what? I know I need to love people. I know I need to be engaged with people. I also know that means I'm going to have to work harder at it. And there's some ways that I can work harder at it. Here's some ways that I can work harder at it. I can go and make sure that I'm, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, I'm charged up.
Right.
I know that it's going to take some recovery time after being with a lot of people. And that's okay. I can accept that. I can just make space in my life for that sort of thing so that I can better love people instead of use my introversion as an excuse for never actually engaging with people and loving them.
Yeah, and you can do that with the introversion, extroversion is easy, but you could see how this applies across, I'm a thinker. I don't intuit, so I don't have to care about Jake's feelings right now. I can just be unkind because I'm a logician.
That's just the way I am.
I'm just...
Well, you guys have both had more experience with Myers-Briggs stuff than I have. I've actually read a book on the Enneagram. I was pretty interested in it at one time. And so one thing the Enneagram does, and I'm not clear that Myers-Briggs does this, is it says, here's your type. Here are the places you need to try and develop into. And if you're healthy, you'll become more like this other type in this respect. So I don't know that Myers-Briggs does that, does it?
Myers-Briggs, I mean, it does that ends up resulting because of it, but
I got you.
It is not...
Lots of Myers-Briggs, if you take a knockoff version like 16personalities.com or whatever, it will say, here are your strengths, here are your weaknesses, here are the places that you need to be aware of, here are the ways that maybe you can push yourself and grow. And then if there's always like some paid feature where you can
right. Pay some money to find
get behind a paywall and really find out all the ways that you need to grow to become a more healthy and
But I would say there is a difference in that Myers-Briggs is more descriptive and less prescriptive.
Less a self-improvement philosophy.
Right. And I think that's probably one reason, among others, that the Enneagram has become co-opted as a Christian tool.
Right.
And has begun to take over, well, could we say take over churches? That sounds kind of histrionic. I feel like a certain alarm might ring if we say that. But it has begun to take over churches. So,
well, it is, if it is in more in that spiritual self-improvement genre, we're still talking about a spiritual mystical self-improvement instead of godly spirit-led sanctification.
Right.
We're talking about behavior modification, not holiness.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, Kevin DeYoung wrote an article critiquing the Enneagram. Yeah. So he focused on a book called The Road Back to You, which is a so-called evangelical Christian book on the Enneagram and how to use it. But what Kevin DeYoung says that's the most like knockdown critique is it's all about becoming your true self. It's about how sin cuts you off from becoming your true self. And that's the focus of the book.
Right.
Not how sin cuts you off from God. Yeah, I found a Christian website responding to him that says, well, John Calvin said, you have to know yourself.
Right.
And that was basically their response to his review. I thought that was pretty weak.
That is pretty weak. Although I will admit I've been thinking about that John Calvin quote this entire time.
Me too.
It's a great quote.
It's a great quote, and I suppose it ties in.
Do we have it? So Calvin, this is at the beginning of the Institutes of the Christian Religion. Okay, quote, our wisdom, insofar as it ought to be deemed true and solid wisdom, consists almost entirely of two parts, the knowledge of God and of ourselves. But as these are connected together by many ties, it is not easy to determine which of the two precedes and gives birth to the other, end quote.
Bit of a chicken and an egg kind of thing there.
Yep.
And that begins to put your finger on why we might be uncomfortable with some of these tests, because they sever, at their worst, they sever the knowledge of God and the knowledge of the way that He's made the world.
But also why we're not really interested in condemning them wholesale.
Right.
They actually do teach you things.
I am much more uncomfortable with the Enneagram, and I think that the way that I would maybe define my discomfort is by saying, well, another John Calvin quote, our hearts are factories of idols, right? But there is a difference between a football game, which people can idolize. You know, we talk about don't make football an idol, and somebody building a golden statue and saying, it's a new god. You know, there's a categorical difference there.
Yep.
And Myers-Briggs, while it can be misused, doesn't nearly go out of its way to present itself as a new god or a new philosophy the way that Enneagram often does.
Yeah.
Is there such a thing as a good use of Enneagram? I have no idea. I don't know. I don't know it well enough. Is it often blatantly misused and used poorly, used wickedly? Yes. And that's something that I wouldn't necessarily say about Myers-Briggs. Although as I say that, it's, well, you know, Myers-Briggs is often, you know what I mean? There's a difference.
I mean, there's a difference. I think Jung and even his personality types, it was all about creating a secular religion for him. And that is why he is one of the more influential thinkers of the 20th century. And
as you pointed out, science is a religion for a lot of people, so they just define themselves a certain way, and they're willing to have everything just be an outgrowth of this test that has a sort of scientific sheen much more than Enneagram does.
If you think about it this way, the American civil religion is we have our hero's journey, which is all the ways that we make sense of ourselves and our place in this world. So we have our narrative truth. We have our Myers-Briggs personality tests that put their finger on who we are and how we behave and how we can grow. It all is a part of an ethos that is American secular religion. Right. That we all grow up, breathing in.
By that standard, we can't ever turn off our discernment when we're using any kind of personality test.
Right.
We can never just live comfortably with them as though they're good furniture to have around.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yet, I want to keep pushing back a little bit and just say Enneagram does tap or tie in or at least present itself as spiritual in a way that, I don't know, it just makes me uncomfortable. It just even the fact that it uses the iconography of spiritualism, it just feels like it feeds a little part of you. Maybe we could even argue that Myers-Briggs is equally bad or equally concerning in a different way. But I think there is a difference between there's a little mystical, Gnostic, New Age part of all of us that wants to believe in bad spiritualism. That Enneagram feeds more.
We all want the special knowledge, and Myers-Briggs is kind of interesting, but Enneagram has a certain pull. At least that's why I liked it, is because it has a certain pull. Like, okay, I'm finally going to learn what I ought to be and how to change. Like, I want to change to be all I can be.
Right.
Myers-Briggs, I don't think I really felt the same thing.
Yeah, Myers-Briggs, that special knowledge, that maybe puts a finger on it for me. Myers-Briggs purports to tell you what you should already know. Actually, it's just giving terminology to something that we all kind of intuitively understand, whereas Enneagram and things like that purport to offer something special, something beyond. And again, you can push back and say how Myers-Briggs kind of does that with a more materialistic sheen to it, and I understand that. I do just think Enneagram makes me uncomfortable in a way that Myers-Briggs doesn't. Maybe I'm crazy.
No, I don't think you're crazy. I mean, you're 4. What else would you say? You know, that's the kind of thing you would say.
Maybe you're more comfortable being a materialist.
Do you think I'm stupid about that?
No, I don't. I don't think you're stupid about it. I for some reason, feel the pressure to say what we actually live and breathe in is this world of psychology and psychological pseudoscience combined with our hero's journey stories. That is our modern secular religion. It is religious. It is just as pagan as the Enneagram. It just doesn't feel that way to us. And I don't have... Of course, the Enneagram is going to feel more icky because it is that sort of Gnostic, cultish, outsidery kind of thing.
Right.
But I just want to... I feel some pressure to say, hey, so is everything that is a part of the pseudoscience that we call psychology that isn't really all that scientific and certainly isn't based in any kind of biblical truth. Both of them are capable of getting at real truths about who we are and how we behave, and even ways we can change our behavior. But yeah, I just think... So I'm not trying to push back and say that the Enneagram's not more icky. I think it is. I think it is more gross and more disturbing. It is more cultish. It is more...
Right.
But I just don't want us to give a
free pass.
Give a free pass to the modern secular materialist religion that sort of everybody buys into because it's just all part of our accepted cultural civil religion.
Yeah.
Well, there's also probably some truth to the fact that if you were to abandon the faith, you'd become a materialist, and if I was to abandon the faith, I'd become a mystic something or other.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
So I feel more threatened by Enneagram.
Well, it's also more of what we're repenting of, right? Like
precisely. I'm repenting of interest in
the occult.
And
I'm repenting of American civil religion.
Baseball and crap.
Yeah.
You're not repenting of
apple
baseball.
pie.
You know what I'm saying. Yeah.
What am I repenting of?
I
don't know what I'm
Your hero is Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
the national treasure that he sought. Is there anything else that concerns you guys about this, or that you kind of want to talk about? The alarm never went off, and I don't think it's going to.
I'm not sad.
You know, when I say that, usually it's an indication that the alarm's about to go off, because Sound of Sanity is nothing if not an ironic universe, the Sound of Sanity verse. But actually, the alarm's not going off this episode, guys.
Well, I think if I were a Christian immersed in the Enneagram, or if I really liked it and had affinity for it, I would come back at you and I would just say, look, like the Enneagram is not supplanting the Bible. Just because I use it for spiritual growth, I'm using it inside my relationship with Jesus, under the authority of the Bible. Like, I know the Bible's the Word of God and the Enneagram is just a thing, but God uses just things that people come up with, like medicine or whatever, to help us, and this is helpful to me. And it just gives you language for sanctification.
Well, what's the difference between that and a book like my wife's been reading a book called Love and Respect, so she can learn to respect me.
Exactly.
And that book talks about we need to get off the crazy cycle and get on to the healing cycle or the energizing cycle. And it talks about, when we're using love, it gives you little formulas, or the 5 love languages, or, there's all kinds of things that probably all of our listeners have found helpful at one time or another that offer formulas. I mean, how about Calvin and John Calvin tulip? I mean, maybe that's taking the argument too far, but there's all kinds of things that provide extra biblical knowledge,
right?
And
it's just a way of giving us handles,
right?
Yeah, I don't have too much of a problem with the way that you framed what you said, actually, because I am for, taking the tools that are given to us as handles and using them where we can. But there's a difference between taking a pagan tool or handle and actually saying, okay, this helps explain something. This is another way of framing or talking about this biblical reality. And then there's a way of just straight up syncretizing the pagan tools and making them reframing. There's reframing things in biblical terms, and there's reframing things in biblical terms.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's a reframing of things in biblical terms that is, the Bible is my standard, and this helpful way of thinking over here, I understand what's good about it, and I also understand what's bad about it because I'm interpreting that handle through the lens of Scripture. And then there's a way of taking biblical language and just dressing up your pagan ideologies in biblical language and reframing it that way. That's just called syncretism, and it's been around for millennia.
Been around since true religion's been around.
And that's bad, and it's a difficult line to sort of walk.
Yeah, part of me wants to say,
or maybe not a difficult line to walk, but it's difficult to sort of really see what's going on with people when they're doing the one or doing the other.
The additional level of complication is that a good-hearted Christian may find material that is syncretistic and use it biblically.
That's right.
Or
that is what happens.
Or people may take material like the 5 love languages or stuff that's basically good and rooted in theology and make a little mini religion out of it.
Well,
so,
I think that the difference is, like, for instance, on the bookening, what you guys do with something like Narnia. So that's not the best example because Lewis is a Christian and that's complicated. But whatever, something like Narnia, you don't just assume that everything you find in Narnia is going to be good for you.
No, we do not.
The only purpose of the bookening is to teach people to have some discernment in what they read.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and if you and the Enneagram though is a tool of, like, it's like commitment, right? It's like a regimen of medicine. It's not like people are coming to it thinking, how can I discern what's good and what's bad in here? What they're thinking is, how do I commit myself to this so that I get the spiritual benefit? That is a bad way to approach books, and it's a bad way to approach things like this.
Yeah.
So this guy, Derek Vreeland, who I referred to earlier without mentioning his name, he's the one. I just found his random article in response to Kevin DeYoung's Gospel Coalition article. Yes, we will post a link to a Gospel Coalition article. Yay! This guy says, here's the last thing he writes. And I don't think, Jake, that you would be comfortable if I were saying something like this to you. Quote, set aside any concern that the implicit spirituality in the Enneagram is somehow dangerous or harmful, and allow it to open up
bad
and allow it to open up new vistas of self-awareness and self-understanding that you may see God's work within your own heart. End quote.
Yeah, that's bad.
that's bad.
But the thing is that's what the Enneagram is for. The Enneagram is for the Enneagram. Does that make sense? What I'm saying? The Enneagram is like, hey, give your heart to this. That's
it demands you reorient your life around it.
That's the feeling of the whole thing.
Right.
That is like, I feel like that's implicit in it. It's like going to pull you in.
Right.
Let me tell you who you really are. Let me give you the language about who you really are. I mean, I think that this kind of stuff is actually narcissistic as well.
And that's a good point to make.
Yeah. I mean, Myers-Briggs can do that to you. For sure. Like, I know when I've looked at the Myers-Briggs, sometimes it's because I feel slightly obsessed about knowing exactly who or what I am. But the Enneagram is, I think, more so. I think anyone who overuses this stuff or uses it without discernment is going to end up heading towards narcissism. But the Enneagram has more of a danger.
Yeah. Let me just sort of, while we're at it, mention one critical flaw in all of these personality tests.
Okay.
Which is all these personality tests purport to teach you about yourself. But you know what I have found? I have found they require a great deal of self-knowledge in order to accurately...
Okay.
And so here's what I mean, is somebody can take the Myers-Briggs test and completely answer all of the questions, all the diagnostic questions that are supposed to get at the realities of themselves wrong. Because they don't even understand themselves. Because they're projecting an ideal of themselves that they think is good. But it's not, it has no bearing on how they actually interact with the world.
Those tests are actually really hard to take because I never know, particularly when I took a real one for work and I felt like it kind of mattered. I really had a hard time with it because it was like, I know that I'm a sinner, therefore I know I'm capable of thing X that it's talking about. Would you ever steal from the workplace, let's say? Well, I know biblically that I am capable of stealing from the workplace.
And therefore I can just implicitly accept that there are all kinds of circumstances where I might be, and I'm going to analyze that because I have a biblical understanding of theft.
Right.
That
I understand.
In fact, I steal from the workplace all the time because you know
time.
what? Exactly. I'm stealing time
That's
all
right.
the time. My thoughts are distracted. I spend too long in the bathroom. I need to take a breather. I'm going to check my phone. I'm going to whatever it is.
11 minutes instead of 10 minutes.
That is time that is not devoted to the job that I'm being paid to do right now, and that is stealing. And therefore, you have all this stuff.
But I also know that the Holy Spirit has worked in my heart, and that I probably won't steal in the sense that they mean it.
Yeah, because what they actually mean is, are you actually going to take a computer? Like, are you going to take money? Are you going to embezzle funds? Are you going to steal merchandise?
But I also know I might leave a pen in my pocket. So I could, if we're just going with the disagree, strongly disagree, if we're going on that spectrum, I could choose any one of those and
be completely justified in doing so.
A justified answer. And do I answer from my knowledge of the sinfulness of my heart, or the knowledge of what I would probability
my
says
normal
I would
patterns
do?
Of behavior?
Right. Do I answer out of my insecurities? My wife tends to get radically different answers on these. I had her take 16 questions. She took it, and then I took it for her. And it's like, it's because she's an extrovert. She's an extrovert, but then, like a normal person, she feels insecurities about being an extrovert and about whether people like her and stuff like that. Nothing unusual there. How much does she answer the questions according to the vulnerabilities that she feels, and how much does she answer it according to, as you say, Jake, her patterns of behavior? Party Meredith is a lot different than Meredith at home with Nathan, and Party Nathan, I can confirm, is a lot different than Nathan at podcast. Nathan is different than Nathan talking to Ben, is different than Nathan talking to Jake, is different than Nathan in a meeting with four people.
Yep.
Person, and then the heart is deceitful above all things. Who can know it?
Exactly.
We don't actually have. You need to understand that however good these tools get, however good they are very broken and very blunt instruments.
Because they don't have the most fundamental realities of human existence at the foundation of their philosophies, right? The fall of man, original sin, is the most foundational thing that you can know about any single person that there is. Everyone is fallen and sinful, and by nature totally depraved. Let's start there. None of these start there. That's the most foundational thing you can know about any single person. The one thing that explains everything, right? Was it Descartes or Pascal who said,
"Without this mystery, the greatest of all, we remain mysteries to ourselves."
Exactly.
Paraphrase Pascal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a pretty good paraphrase, or incomprehensible to ourselves. Yeah,
right. Incomprehensible. Yeah, that was the word.
Yeah, and that's true. It's just at the end of the day, do you really want to explain your behavior? There are things that you do just because they're wrong, and you like bad things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's like Augustine talking about stealing the pears. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've read Augustine's Confessions. He's like,
the pears were more sweet. They were more delicious. In fact, they were only delicious. They were only good. He only enjoyed them because they were stolen.
He sits there and he just tries to analyze. We're kids. We steal all these pears from a tree. Were they good pears? No. We actually had better orchards ourselves that we had access to.
Right.
Were we hungry? No. And at the end of the day, he gets down to it, and he was just like,
we liked stealing the pears.
It was for the joy of stealing and for the joy of doing that together.
Yeah. That means
pushing each other into further wickedness. It was just, we liked being wicked.
Right.
It was for the thrill of being wicked.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah, that means that, like, even, whatever handles the Enneagram gives you, for instance, on your own sinfulness and your need to grow, it's going to leave out. I mean, I would be shocked if Christian books on the Enneagram didn't also leave this out. It's going to leave out that you want your own world your own way, and you have a love of doing wrong because you love rebelling against God, and that's your desire. And I just don't see that these personality things are going to address that, but the Bible does.
Yep. And I think the point that Ben makes about simply makes about narcissism is such a good point. Self-knowledge is overrated, actually. I mean, I know Calvin liked it. I know the Bible I know we should have self-knowledge, but what I mean by that is there's a narcissistic way to just pursue self-knowledge as an end in and of itself.
That's right.
God's, true religion is this: love God, love your neighbor. you can do both of those, and you need to know yourself well enough to know to do those. And of course, we grow in self-awareness as we become better Christians, as we're sanctified. But God does not grant us perfect knowledge of ourselves. There are good reasons for that. And it is narcissistic to simply spend too much time pondering the great mystery that is you.
Well, but Nathan, the reason that I like these tests is because they give me insights into other people, and I have more compassion for them after I figure out what number they are or what ENFTFJHI they are.
Guess
or
what?
whatever.
You're responsible for loving them no matter what their number is or their personality type.
Right.
Did you know that?
So are you saying that I shouldn't look for any help in loving them better through things like this?
We've never once said that.
No.
We've never once said that.
Feel free.
I might be being a little devilish right now. Listener, you decide. All right. Fair, Jake. I accept my responsibility.
Well, and I also, the little side point, oftentimes in my life, I'll just speak for myself here, it's been God's mercy that he hasn't allowed me to see certain things about myself, because I would have been given over to despair if I knew how sinful I was, if I knew how stupid I was being. He's actually given me self-knowledge in bursts over time as I'm able to handle it with maturity. And I think that's part of how God works, and to demand a complete self-knowledge at any given time just is not helpful.
Yeah. Now, listen, I know that there are listeners out there that took a personality test and God used it to humble them and show them things about themselves that other people have said about them that maybe they didn't believe to be true. And I don't think that anything that we have said invalidates that sort of thing at all. All we are saying at the end of the day is, hey, good tools make terrible masters.
Yeah.
And that's a thing that we say a whole lot. And so you can use the personality test as a good tool. It just can't be a master. You have to be mastered by Scripture, by God's Word. And you have to be oriented around the people that actually love you and care about you and that know you in real life, not dead mystical weirdos like Carl Jung.
Right. And the other part of that is that some personality tests may be better suited to be masters than to be good tools.
Right.
And you should know the difference.
Right. It's like that smart hammer that keeps track of how much you're using it and reports back to your boss.
What?
They're smart tools now. They're developing smart tools.
Yeah, that gauge worker performance.
That gauge performance.
Like
Enneagram, I think, is a little bit more like that. And your boss is Carl Jung.
Super tyrannical, weird stuff.
Well,
yeah.
We'll be back in a couple weeks. But hey, listen, good tools, bad masters. The reason we did this episode is because we like personality tests, actually. Me and Jake are always talking about ENF whatever. And
I'm on a heroic quest for personal self-development. I'm going to become an awesome version of me. You listeners, you're along for the ride. Or actually, I guess you're not, because I don't think that's a good idea after all. So
thanks, Ben.
Anytime, Jake.
Ba-dum-bum, ba-dum-bum. Sanity was produced by Nathan, executive produced by Jake and Nathan, associate performed, I think we decided. Produced, performed by, conceived of by Benjamin J. Solzer. Support us at patreon.com/Sound of Sanity. Leave us a nice review on iTunes, 5 stars. Write a little nice thing about us if you like. And until next time,
stay sane.